With that, Malhaz, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm sorry for taking 5 minutes, a little 5 minutes extra on
I'm
you.
sorry.
Let me
All
stop
right,
that.
thank you. No, I like this activity, and one of the things that I want to mention is that again we're short of time in here. So, but there's part of the activity in there involves looking at and asking that kind of a questions afterwards. Um, who benefits and who receives the costs? Who benefits who receives the benefits and who pays the costs, right? And that's going to be very critical here because we can kind of look at it and say that, oh, okay, well, benefits and costs, they're not equally distributed, right? Um, so when we're looking at issues of the industrialization and like modernization of military, the Soviet Union had to take that had to those decisions were made decision makers, right? And it was on the backs of the peasants from collectivization and from a tremendous decrease in agricultural production, consumer production. So the costs were borne by the population, benefits largely accrued to the leaders, right? Sure, the population felt a little bit that they were benefited too if we're talking about like industrialization and electrification and everything, the electricity being distributed to many different kind of parts of the country, but at what cost? At really tremendous cost, right? But because the decision makers didn't have to bear that cost, that was an easy decision to make. So that's another thing that when you put in there is saying that, okay, why is that those decision makers are more easily making that decision? Because it's not on their backs. Um, and um, and that helps you put yourself in the shoes of the decision maker. Another part of that is that those decision makers, even if they were making the best decisions that they could, they didn't have the foresight, right? And you're basically looking at what is the next best alternative. That's the alternative not taken. And it's really difficult to kind of figure out what is the road not taken and what will be the benefits of road not taken. So that's difficult. I want to go back to some of the things because a number of you I want to ask questions, and Austin thankfully kind of mentioned that to me because I couldn't really read your comments and in the chat room while I was talking. But I think I kind of responded a little bit more when we talk about Heather Americans. You said that Ukraine didn't exist at the time, and yeah, absolutely, Soviet Union was a production production included all those republics. But what I want to really kind of go back to that is, and I want to be very clear about this in the sense that there's a lot of disinformation, obviously, we're aware of that is, outside in the world, and especially now, and especially when it comes to issues of the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. And one of the issues that Russia mentions that is if you agree to that, it's almost like a concession to them, is saying that Ukraine is not, Ukraine didn't exist and Ukraine shouldn't exist, right? I'm not. I'm pretty sure that what was mentioned, but I wanted to kind of mention that is that Kiev and Rus, which was Kiev in Ukraine, gave birth to Russia. So Ukraine gave birth to Russia. Russia didn't exist when Ukraine existed. Moscow didn't exist when Kiev existed. So when you're looking at the history and then formation of the Slavic nations and others, where it was both Slavic and some steppe Turkic people in north of Caucasus and north of Caspian region, but and also a lot of the Vikings that came over and became kind of a ruling class. The formation of that really kind of emerges at the center in Kiev. So the propaganda that is being disseminated now by Russia saying that the Ukrainians are Russians, well, it's the other way around. Russians are Ukrainians. Ukrainians gave birth to Russians, in a sense. Moscow moved afterwards. So I wanted to kind of mention that because that matters a lot. As we saw in the Soviet Union, also the propaganda very actively being used against population is an active form of warfare. And that active form of warfare is being disseminated in the United States also. If you change people's minds, then you don't have to use guns. That's something that I want to mention. Also, Sean Maloney, you mentioned that Stalin's purges largely focused on Jews. Yes, they did, but it wasn't just Jews. Stalin's, and nobody really knows what Stalin's mind was, but with what we can tell, Stalin's purges really focused on the threat to his power. And threat to his power was against the people who knew him best to some extent, and who knew him early on. So a lot of the purges actually took place in Georgia. Georgia nation, disproportionately, kind of suffered under those purges in terms of a lot of educated class, artisans, artists, writers that were free thinkers. That when Stalin was being, before Stalin became ruler, was functioning in Georgia and Caucasus area, he knew those people and he knew how those people viewed them, and a lot of them he just eliminated right off the bat. And many of you might be aware of, Stalin was Georgian. A lot of Georgians view it as, unfortunately, he was Georgian, because he definitely did not do anything. I wouldn't say anything, but he did a lot of kind of a damage to not just other people, but mostly Georgians also. But yeah, Trotsky was Jewish. Some of the leaders of the Bolshevik Revolution were Jewish, not practicing Jewish, but still they were. Stalin targeted people who he felt that he was threatened by. Okay, so I want to make sure we'll go through this fairly quickly, because some of the stuff I don't want to dwell too much on it. But one of the things that I want to dwell is when we're talking about the difference between the socialism and communism, and that crosses over into another program that we teach, that, as I mentioned, realities of socialism. Because nowadays we see this resurgence of belief that, well, look, Soviet Union didn't do it right. It was, as I mentioned, as I show you in here, Stalin, Lenin, and then Bolsheviks did it from top down. It was a dictatorship. It wasn't organically that it emerged as a democratic socialism that Marx viewed. Therefore, maybe we can do it better. Not necessarily communism, but the idea of socialism. And a lot of times, that's why the program that we teach focuses on things like Denmark, Sweden, and the kind of socialism that they have, the socialism in the kind of quotations that I'm going to say, that is viewed that it's socialistic. But when we look at those countries, they're highly capitalistic. Private property protection, ownership, profits, highly competitive. But what they have is redistribution, a lot of redistribution of wealth. But it's not redistribution from really poor, really rich to really poor. The marginal tax rate there, where, if you are in the United States and you're earning maybe upwards to a little less than $100,000, you would be paying in Sweden upwards to 50% taxes. So the big redistribution comes from the lower or middle class to the lower and middle class, in terms of the services provided. And those services that are provided are not government provided. A lot of the education is not directly government provided, but it's almost like a voucher system. So this is what we're looking at here, is that a lot of times people, especially students, will look at it and say, look, that's a better way to go. And I want to say, look, when we went through pandemic and we have kids, and as a teachers, we had to deal with kids and a lot of things that are on our backs, and daycare and all the costs and things like that. Unfortunately, when we look at the countries that have what we call free daycare and other things like that, we say that, that provides quite a bit of benefit, right? All healthcare services, but those healthcare services are also some semi-private and provided private, not directly government provided, but government provided. But what we want to look at it here is that if we call those socialists, and the prime minister of those, I think it was Sweden's prime minister, the quote, I don't have it here, it was in the lecture previously I had, mentions that when people call us socialists, that is very wrong, because we are not. We are very capitalist. We just have high taxes, right? Why I'm mentioning this is because the idea of Marxist ideas saying that, okay, maybe they will naturally and organically emerge, and if we have highly capitalist society, developed society, and then now we have this communal ownership, the idea of even the lower case of social communism, which is a socialism, means the means of production should be in hands of the government. But the means of the production are not in the hands of Swedish and Danish governments. Means of the production is in private hands. It's just that less high taxation or redistribution. What happens when you have means of the production in the hands of government is that there's the number of problems emerge: control problem, knowledge problem, and incentive problem. Incentive problem I already mentioned some to some extent here when we talked about, like, if you're on a commune and you're 10 person, collective, and you don't have an incentive to work harder because you don't get as much benefit, and you have incentive to shirk work. The control problem is that if, let's say, you're the best, you're the most, kind of a benevolent government, dictator, a benevolent, leader, and you take the control of all the resources because you don't want that income redistributing income to be so highly unequal. What you have to do is you have to now decide what goods and services to produce, for whom to produce. Well, we can kind of look at it and say that, well, how many farms do we have in Russia? Well, how many tractors do we need? Okay, we can go out there and produce tractors. So you can scientifically think that, okay, maybe we need to produce this many tractors, maybe we need to produce this much food, this many shoes, we have this much population. But then you think about it, how do you account for probability that this little part of the carburetor on the tractor breaks down more often than something else, and when that breaks down, the whole tractor is gone, right? So you have no idea. Even if the best information, the more information you try to get, you have no idea. You have a knowledge problem that you cannot know that you need to produce this 2-cent product that will make that, I don't know, $5,000 tractor work. And it keeps breaking down. How does the capitalist society that doesn't have a control in the hands of the centralized top-down decision maker, but in the hands of all the private makers know? They don't know. The local producers are only focused on one thing: profit. And they're focused on the profit. That means they're going to be looking at saying, okay, well, how do I make profit? Well, I'm going to produce something that people want. How do I know what people want? I have no idea of reading people's mind, but I can look at the prices of the product. And suddenly the prices of this little part of the carburetor piece just shot up. Oh, wait a minute, I have ability to produce that. I have my cost of production is lower. I can make a whole huge profit. So instead of producing some other product that can make a lower profit, I'm going to switch my production to this. So you're doing that for your own selfish benefit of making as much profit as possible. You might be a terrible person, not care about the society at all, but you might be care about yourself. But you are doing the society's bidding because you allow prices to send that signal to you and produce right product that is right now needed by society. And that information cannot ever be somewhat aggregated and added and provided to some smart decision maker on the top, because it's constantly changing and evolving. Right? So prices represent a very important signal that allows this decentralized decision making to produce right amount of products for the people who need it, and for industrial production, for any kind of a production. Right? So even if you have the best leaders, the smartest leaders, they have the most technology on the top, and are most benevolent, what ends up happening is that you don't have a knowledge problem. Therefore, you end up producing things that are not correct. That you mismatch the production. And in the Soviet Union production, they were producing this many leather shoes for women. If they didn't want it, they just kept producing it because they didn't know what else to produce, because they didn't know what people's tastes and preferences were, right? So that's a knowledge problem. Control problem deals with the fact that if you think of economy as like a chess game, say, okay, where are your scientific socialism? Let's actually sit down and move pieces around. Let's see how much metal should we dedicate to industrial production, how much to this, to this, to this, to this. That chess piece, you're thinking that you move the chess piece and it stays there. It doesn't stay there. Adam Smith talks about that the chess piece is moved by itself. People change their behavior according to the decisions that you make. Like, for example, if we live in Northern Virginia here, I live in Northern Virginia here, the traffic is really bad. There's areas of the both public roads that just tend to be really, congested, and there's toll roads. And we say, well, the toll roads you have to pay. So you have to pay $20 to drive on toll roads. That's really expensive. That's not fair. So let's do it better. Let's just get rid of the private toll roads and let's build really wide highways. And so let's build a really wide highways. Let's look at how much population we have. Let's look at what the traffic is on overall. Let's be scientific about it. When you do that, you're thinking, this is the amount of population, this is the people working here and there and there, and they're going to be driving on two-way, this way, this way. You can account for all that. But what you don't account for now is that I'm sitting here at home and I'm deciding, okay, well, I have like half an hour and the highway is free now. So I'm going to go to a grocery store and buy one or two items that I forgot. But if I have to pay for that toll road or pay for waiting in line or driving on the road, I say it's not worth it for me to buy those two products at the grocery store. I'll wait and I'll go to the grocery store next weekend, right? So I change my behavior. Now that the road is free, a lot more people drive on it. You can't account for that. People move around by themselves. So control problem devolves that in order for you to effectively control the economy from top down, you have to control the people. And that's what Hayek and others talk about, that Marxism and ideas, even if we're talking about the bottom-up democratic, kind of evolution that Marx idealizes, can only lead to stronger and stronger, higher and higher control, because the controllers on the top, even if they have the best intentions, don't have ability to have the knowledge and don't have ability to make sure that the people stay and do what they do, right? So that's a kind of a long piece of winded thing, but I think it's really relevant because we have this kind of a view that, oh, maybe we can do it better. Soviet Union was an aberration because it was not true ideas of Marx. It was a totalitarianism. Maybe we can do it scientifically, but no, all issues of the communism and everything, it was scientific communism, things like that. But the issues of the control of the control, knowledge problem, and incentive problem always exist, and because of that, that situation always devolves to worse and worse and worse and higher control society. Okay, I know there's many of you that mentioning some the comments in here, but I want to continue on very quickly, so we get ahead, because I want to make sure that we have about 5 more minutes or 6 more minutes before we go to lunch. Lenin's goals of decision maker was to, again, that comes back down to that journey of choices, that activity you guys did, right? What was Lenin's goal? Of course, Lenin's goal was to make the situation better for the people, but overall, the priority was that to secure Bolshevik power for a nation, secure USSR from external enemies, and industrialize to create foundation for growth. And the costs of that, he didn't care about what the cost of it was. And the cost of it was tremendous in terms of for the society and for the peasants and for human life, right? Results of choosing centralized control of the economy, consolidation of power, continued food shortages, declining agricultural production. And this is not just a simple thing where, oh, declining agricultural production is not bad. No, we're talking about major starvation to the point where in Ukraine, the Golodomor that happened not during Lenin's time, but during Stalin's time, and some of the historians kind of view it as it was almost intentionally done to kind of kill off any kind of ethnic opposition to the Soviet Union. But those starvations persist for a long time during all these, communist, early on communist reforms. But there's visible evidence of progress. Visible evidence is that you have factories that build, you have mechanization, you have buildings, you have roads, infrastructure. Rural areas are, the electricity goes to rural areas, right? And a lot of the countries take a heed of it and look at it and say, now look what's happening at this time in the United States. There's Great Depression happening. Look what capitalism, what is the results of capitalism? Great Depression. That, and on the other hand, Soviet Union growth is enormous, right? But the growth is only these things: factories, mechanization, roads. Roads are only useful if it provides the value for the people. I could spend a whole lot of money and time and devote people with the shovels and everything else to build a road to nowhere. But if it doesn't provide the benefit for people to drive on it, and need to drive on it, then what's the point, right, of that? But the problem is that only thing that satisfies what the society wants is in the heads of individuals. What do they want? On basic level, food, the kind of a life, leisure, the more comfort in life and other things like that. Those are harder, and those are all consumer goods, all the little trinket consumer goods that make things life easier for us, that provides value, right? But those big ticket items are visible. Those other items are not visible, right? So that makes it harder, because if you are, a central decision maker, you're not going to sit down and say, well, look, why don't we just make this many, tampons? I mentioned tampons because there was I think it was a Croatian, I don't remember the name, Croatian journalist who said that the Soviet Union used to produce tractors and tanks and everything else very effective, but nobody had, rarely had any tampons, right? Well, that's not really something that you're gonna showcase, saying that we produce this many tampons for this much women. Yeah, of course you can do that, but it's much easier to show the big tanks, much easier to show the big factories and the things like that. So the focus was on things that are visible and in terms of progress. But that progress was visible, so it strengthened the moral and cultural leg. It also, maybe India and other countries looked at the Soviet Union and said, maybe this is the reason direction we want to go, instead of the United States when we're looking at the Great Depression, what's happening in the Great Depression. So maybe the communism is the right way to go. Propaganda also strengthened the moral cultural leg. The very effective propaganda that was coming out from the Bolsheviks, of people, and of course everybody knew what was happening with the purges, and especially when Stalin's purges started, but it wasn't as bad. Obviously it wasn't as bad during Lenin's time, but even that time the kulaks and peasants who were sent to the Siberia. But a lot of that was, again, you can brainwash people very effectively, and unfortunately now we have much stronger tools to brainwash people, and we see that in not just in Russia but in Western countries also. Communist visions, workers of United Unite. So all of this international is an international idea, saying that, hey, not only are we strong and developing industrially, but we are also viewed internationally as a very powerful country. So all of that strengthens moral and cultural leg. So you have strong political and legal leg and strong moral and cultural leg. Even though economic leg is not very good, it sustains the Soviet Union, right? You can see that during those times, worsening situation where we're looking at the worsening economic conditions in 1990, in the 1917 to 1921. This is the wheat. Wheat crop and Russian output, the agricultural output declined dramatically. So we're here, right here, before we start to go up, right? Because what's happening now is that Lenin realizes, oh, wait a minute, we're not doing really well. We're doing worse. We have famine. We actually are producing not wealth of stuff. Maybe we're producing more industrial production, but we have a lot less industrial, agricultural production. So we need a course adjustment. So 1921, he introduces a new economic policy. And new economic policy reintroduces private ownership on some level back into the Soviet Union. So before, it was very drastic in a sense that even the idea was that to, like, when we look at banks were nationalized, and the idea was to even get rid of cash and everything else would be in kind, meaning that you wouldn't actually use money. The idea was that to not to have money at all, but to have, like, I'm going to provide this much goods, almost like a barter, but on accounting level. The banks will be a centralized accounting organizations. So what I'm mentioning that is that there was very drastic level of reforms of collectivization, and everything else was owned by the state, right? But as we saw, the results of that is that, well, no, and we need to have that. So they actually privatized some of them, not privatized, but they allowed small firms to operate, allowed small parcel of lands or agricultural level, allowed peasants to produce, allowed to small shops and other things to operate based on profit on smaller scale, right? And we saw the improvement. We saw the improvement in agricultural output and just overall output. So the Lenin's view in it was that we're taking one step backward in order to take two steps forward. And there were a number of oppositions against Lenin, saying that, oh, you're going against the Marxist and communist ideals, or introducing this some level of private ownership and things into the side of this capitalist institutions in there. But Lenin, he was very, very, very good orator, and very sarcastically and in every way just basically countered that opposition, saying that, look, you guys are all idiots, because what matters here is the control of the basic, what's called the major industrial production capability. So it doesn't matter that you have small little parcels of lands and everything else. We need to control the what he called commanding heights. Commanding heights is major industries, and that is being controlled by the government, and that is the guiding force for industrialization and for changing the society. Okay. Stalin succeeded by Lenin succeeded by Stalin, and then Stalin killed off Trotsky in Mexico. And those are your history lesson. Trotsky, there was a number of assassination attempts. He originally moved to Europe and Denmark, but then afterwards then to Mexico, settled in Mexico. There were a number of assassination attempts, but one attempt was that then finally the assassin killed them with a ice pick or ice axe or axe to the head. Trotsky was Jewish, but Trotsky was head of the Soviet army, where originally created the Soviet army. So really was a challenge to Stalin. Stalin had to get rid of. What I want to stop here now before we go a little bit over. So I'll give you guys a little bit more time, and it will take a little bit more time away from Austin, but that's okay. He can take more time from me for a lecture, because 5 more minutes. Is that's another criticism of that idea that socialism emerges democratically. That Hayek in his the book Road to Serfdom means that in this system, whoever controls the positions are the ones who are going to rise up to the top, are going to be the most ruthless. And Stalin was the most ruthless. And therefore, you have the most ruthless individuals that rise to the top. Therefore, you are leading towards totalitarianism, not something that resembles some level of democratic communal decision making. So I want to stop right here. I know we're supposed to leave at 1:40, and we have how much minutes? 30 minutes for lunch, right? Is this a lunch break?
Yeah. So we have a lunch break, friends, until 2:10 Eastern time. So
Okay.
go enjoy your lunch and be back at 2:10 Eastern Standard Time.
Well, I don't want to take all of that time. If they want to come back at 2:15, if that's okay with you, you can start.
Yeah, 2:15. Yeah.
Let's do 2:15. Yeah. During
2:15.
that time, if anybody has questions or anything else, I'm happy to be here. And I'll look through your comments and then make comments, responses to that during next lecture.